It's the start of the second round, and things look very dubious for Carl Morris. Flynn has absolutely been delivering out the punishment of his life to him. Flynn looks like a marvel. He's smothering Carl Morris, and he's got no chance to even set off a punch. He's up in his chest. He's pounding and pounding away at the midsection. Morris looks in severe trouble. Both eyes appear closed. He is bleeding severely. The end looks in sight for Carl Morris as he is in extreme trouble. He could not even last the round, maybe. It is a complete one-sided destruction by Jim Flynn. Amazing work here. Referee Charlie White is in Carl Morris's corner. He's taking a look at him. He's asking him if he can see at all. The big giant nods yes. And away goes Charlie White. His corner has got a razor in their hand. They appear to be cutting his eye. The big man's legs are quivering masterfully. And it appears the swelling has gone down. He can see. The big man up says he can see. And the round is underway. Morris is smiling. He's running after the ring, eager to take on Flynn. He means business. He's hammering Flynn all over the end of the ring, into the corner. Flynn is covering up, but he can't stop the destruction. Morris means business. He's out for blood. It's a blood fest. Blood must be flying 20 feet into the air. I've never seen such action in my life. This is an absolute complete gore fest. The audience looks nauseated. It's blood everywhere. These two men will not stop trying to murder each other.
Greetings, cheers, welcome to the Historical Boxing Society podcast. This is the fighter profile for boxer number 52, Fireman Jim Flynn. He was born on Christmas Eve of 1879 in Pueblo, Colorado, was where he fought out of. This baby must have been born with some of the greatest bone structure of all time, because the newspapers would comment frequently about the absolute inhuman amount of punishment that Jim Flynn would be capable of absorbing. There was a cartoon in the TV show F is for Family, and there was a boxer in there, and the boxer would bleed in Mickey something, I don't know, but he would start dripping blood before the match even started. As they shook hands, his nose would start bleeding, and that very much was the real depiction of Fireman Jim Flynn, as he was just absolutely, fight after fight, just complete carnage and gore at the amount of punishment this guy would absorb. It was just inhumanly impossible, the amount of destruction he could absorb. And that's one of the most famous things he'd be known for, is the bleeder. That's what we would refer to Jim Flynn as. So we're going to start the preliminaries here. The bio on Jim Flynn. Jim Flynn apparently started boxing at the age of 14 in 1893. Jim Flynn would be one of the most amazing boxers here in the entire catalog of the pioneer boxers here, as he fought through multiple decades. So he started in 1893, fought a little bit through the 1890s, fought the 1900s, and then he fought through the 1910s, or the teens, beautiful time in boxing history. And then he fought through half of the 20s, and he retired in 1925. So he started in 1893 and quit in 1925. I mean, there's not very many boxers that can have that. Maybe Sam Langford, but obviously that makes Flynn's total rounds as just an astronomical amount, as he was one of the very few fighters here of all these boxing profiles that are over 1,000 rounds boxed, which is just the veteran of all veterans. And Flynn would be called what they would refer to him in the newspaper as a trial horse, as they would kind of gauge the new up-and-coming white fighters on how they would be able to beat up Flynn, because he was a smaller guy. He was only 5'10" and a half, maybe, in a true light heavyweight at about 180 pounds. Okay, so his fighting style would be described as a buzzsaw, basically the rushing type of a style. And this style was done by the original pioneer guys right before Jim Flynn, because I guess he started in 1893. So in the mid-1880s would be a fighter that almost a lot of these beginning fighters copied in the barrier champion Joe Goddard. So that's how he fought. He was a rushing style type of fighter. I mean, as soon as the bell rings, he went right after you and gave you very little space. They're up in your grill. Those are the rushing fighters, unless they're doing a round where they're trying to rest, where then they just kind of try and avoid and don't do much offense. But they're up in your grill. They're a rushing style. Competitive rounds fought would be 304 rounds. He's got a great deal of competitive rounds fought. I did the cutoff right when I ended his career. It's a little early, because I didn't pay any attention to when he fell out of his prime. So my score for him would be 32. 32 is a pretty solid score because he's got a lot of fights, so he's got an opportunity to earn a lot of credit. His credit score is 32. So level ups, Flynn is 2 for 6 in level ups. So these are all the opponents that he faced that I considered a level up. Jack Root, Tommy Burns, champion Jack Johnson, twice. Sam Langford, twice. Jack Dillon, and George Gardner. So of all those fights that he had with these guys, he was 2 for 6. Incredibly, he had, of all of these fighters ranked around him, he had one of the greatest level ups of all time, in that he beat a prime version of the Boston Tar Baby, Sam Langford. And he beat him fair and square, actually. Of all the odd things that could ever happen in the world, I mean, it was the veteran Jim Flynn that gave Sam Langford a boxing lesson, and it was a lesson that Langford probably never forgot, on how to deal with the smothering type of fighters, because these are a very unusual style. Not that many people are patterning their fighting style after fighters like Joe Goddard and fighters like Twin Sullivan. Those are in fighters, and that's exactly what Fireman Flynn was. He was an in fighter, like leaving no space between them and the opponent. So Jim Flynn's chief nemesis was Twin Sullivan, and Jack Twin Sullivan. And the weirdest thing with this, he fought Twin Sullivan 4 times, and Jim Flynn actually pretty much adopted his future fighting style all from the matches that he learned with Twin Sullivan. So he tried to take away everything that Twin Sullivan taught him, and he employed it to far future generations of fighters that exact style of fighting, because Jack Twin Sullivan was known as the premier infighter of his day. He was a smotherer at times. So, Fireman Jim Flynn's greatest achievement, obviously his greatest achievement was the win over Sam Langford, which was a level up win. It's an incredible victory, and I mean, there's many fighters ahead of him that don't have any greatest achievement that's anywhere even close to this. I mean, Flynn is, as boxer number 52, is defeating a top 5 boxer, so that's shows you that his ceiling is phenomenal. So the very prime version of Jim Flynn is got a extremely high ceiling based on his level up experience there. And my other greatest achievement of Jim Flynn would be the complete destruction of Carl Morris, the White Hope fighter that was at the beginning of his career. Carl Morris was only his 8th fight in, and Jim Flynn just gave him a terrible, terrible beatdown of all that he never forgot for the rest of his life. And next up, we have the Jim Flynn's biggest miss. His biggest miss would be Stanley Ketchel, probably. In 1908, he was talked about fighting Stanley Ketchel, and it was discussed in a newspaper. And Flynn kind of performed badly against a certain fighter that I can't recall off the top of my head, and he kind of missed his shot at Ketchel, as Ketchel took a different opponent. And another one of his biggest misses would be the Barbados demon Joe Walcott. So you would probably think Joe Walcott would be able to steamroll Jim Flynn, but I think Walcott would have some problems actually with Jim Flynn's smothering type of style. And I mean, if Flynn can beat Langford, then he would obviously be able to give Joe Walcott a really competitive fight. So I would have liked to seen that match happen, and it's would have probably been an epic battle. So next up, we have a newspaper depiction. These are some of the exact words used out of the newspaper to describe him. And this first sentence here is a perfect description of Jim Flynn. One of the gamest fighters who ever donned the mitts. That pretty much is Jim Flynn. Very aggressive. Would usually win the last few rounds of the fight. Very often he would try and purposely win the last 2 rounds to try and at least get himself into a draw after he took a severe butt whipping, because he's usually bleeding and getting his butt whipped at certain points. This is another line from the newspaper. The battle-scarred warrior of Pueblo ripped and torn and slashed his way to victory. A man with a bone density of steel who could absorb terrific beatdowns. Okay, that was the newspaper depictions, and we have 2 more categories here. The next one is how Jim Flynn performed in simulation. This would be pretty interesting because obviously his ceiling was pretty high. He was able to secure a victory over Sam Langford. So let's just see exactly what Jim Flynn's ceiling is in simulation. So he's able to get a win over Bobby Dobbs, the Dixie Kid, fighter far ahead of him here, Peter Maher, fighter in the next generation, Dave Smith. He was able to secure a win over Frank Childs. He was able to get a victory over Mike Schreck. He was able to get victories over people significantly far ahead of him in Old Chocolate, George Godfrey. And finally, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. He was able to get a win over, which was a common opponent of Tommy Burns. Both of them fought for the title against Burns in a relatively close time frame. And Flynn versus Philadelphia O'Brien, Flynn could beat him. His simulation is showing. So, and lastly, we have fighters born around him. So these are a look at his peers and people who he should have had matches with, because Flynn fought 1,000 rounds. So most of these guys are born around him. He should have been fighting. So we're going to look at that and see who they are. So Flynn in the master birth logs here. So Flynn was born in 1879. So we have 1877 would be George Gardner, 1877 young Peter Jackson, 1878 Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, 1878 Jack Johnson, 1878 Mike Sullivan, 1878 Jack Twin Sullivan, 1879 George Cole, 1879 Mike Schreck, 1879 Sandy Ferguson, 1879 Joe Jeanette, 1879 Jim Flynn, 1880 Kid Carter, 1880 Jim Driscoll, 1881 Jim Savage, and 1881 Denver Ed Martin, 1881 Tommy Burns, 1881 Mike Donovan, 1881 Jess Willard. So those are the fighters born immediately around him. So a lot of these fighters he appeared to be missing. He could have fought Joe Jeanette. He could have fought Mike Schreck. It would have been a great match with George Cole. None of these fighters he fought. Denver Ed Martin, he did try against. He had no business trying to take on a heavyweights. He did fight Tommy Burns, and he missed Mike Donovan. I think that would have been a pretty good match. Donovan and Burns would have been a really competitive round there. And he did fight the fighters just previous to him with Philadelphia Jack O'Brien and George Gardner. Both of those he faced. So those are the fighters born around him. And now we are going to take a look at fireman Jim Flynn's lengthy boxing career. And these are his competitive rounds fought and the fight notes. And we're going to do that now. Okay, we're going to go through Jim Flynn's career here. Before I start here, I just want to do a quick note here, because some of you may be wondering why Jim Flynn's greatest achievements, I did not mention that he had a first round KO win over the future heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. I just basically am ignoring that match because the match was a fake match, and I have used sources when I say it's a fake match, and I'll post that up right at this time here. His wife is claiming that he faked the match and practiced taking dives prior to that, and he got $500. She said that he earned them in taking the dive, and I guess at the certain point he probably really needed that money. And Maxine also makes the claim that Dempsey used the name Kid Blackie because he was taking dives and he didn't want it on his record, so he would fight under a different name, a fake name, and use it to take dives. So that's why it's not mentioned in Jim Flynn's greatest achievements, because he really did not knock out Jack Dempsey, and he really, I don't think at any point, even in his prime, had the capacity to be able to knock him out. That really wasn't his style. He wasn't a one-punch fighter. He was, where a person down type of fighter and get him exhausted and then maybe take advantage of him. He certainly didn't have a huge punch enough to knock out Dempsey, so that's why it's not mentioned here. Okay, so we're going to go through his fights here of competitive rounds, and I have a lot of notes here. This took an extensive amount of research, probably like 6 hours, as Flynn has got a long career. So we're going to try and get through this without a lot of mistakes here. Flynn's first competitive rounds match was November 1903. Flynn was age 23. And this is a loss, KO, and 8. These are the notes. The Pueblo man made a very strong showing. Although Rich showed better ring generalship, Flynn showed he was able to hold his own. Flynn was up on his feet when he was counted out. The crowd would have probably attacked the referee if not for police interference. So this would be probably considered a draw. I gave Flynn 1 point for this, for the draw, because it's not really a legitimate knockout in any sense, because he was on his feet and it was a horrible refereeing. So it tends to happen in the early days of boxing there. And the statement there explains it all. The crowd would have probably attacked the referee if not for police interference. That statement's not uttered very frequently, so it's showing complete incompetence by the referee. So the next competitive match, at this point he's age 24. This is in 1904 against George Gardner. This is one of his level ups, much like the previous match, Root. This is a 10-round draw. This is a very close fight. The notes: in the 8th round, a hard right weakened Flynn. Gardner was unable to send in the winning punch. Flynn's strength prevented Gardner from putting him out. The results of the match: 10-round draw. We have this newspaper depiction is about even, so he got 1 point for the draw. This was a pretty good competitive match. July 6, 06 was his next competitive rounds fought, and this was against his nemesis, Jack Twin Sullivan. Twin Sully is what I'll refer to him as. And this was a 15-round draw. Let's see the notes here. A draw after 15 rounds of the most furious milling ever seen in this city. Both men fought furiously from the start to the gong. Flynn was the aggressor throughout. The last round witnesses the furious rally of the fight. Both men were at it, lively. They both wanted a knockout. The gong sounded the end of the battle. Both men were covered with blood, fighting into the center of the ring like two demons. So, I guess these guys could have used a few more rounds. This ended in a 15-round draw against the Twin Sullivan, number 1 match they fought. Fight was very close, and he got 1 point for the draw. Okay, so Flynn's next competitive rounds fought. Again, he's trying to do these level ups here, which is very ambitious of him. Jim Flynn, age 26, October 1906, against Tommy Burns for the heavyweight championship. The results of the match were 15-round loss, KO. These are the notes of the match. The battle was terrific. One, from the start. Burns almost had Flynn out in the 14th round. A right to the jaw sent Flynn down. As the 15th round started, he was up in a few seconds, but another dropped him. He rolled over and got up to his feet once again. Burns dropped Jim Flynn. He was sent down again. The referee forced Flynn to rise again. Burns sent in a punch that sent Flynn down and out. He laid on his back into the center of the ring for 10 minutes as his corner men glared at the referee for forcing him to get up one last time to get a death blow to his face. Flynn punished Burns more than any other boxer ever did. But poor seconds in training was his undoing, is how the newspaper described it. So that was a 15-round loss, KO. And he got 0 points for a 15-round loss. Flynn's next competitive rounds match, that was October 1906 against Burns. He's immediately going to go right back into the talent pool, and January 1907, take on the second match with twin Sully. These are the notes from the fight. Second round match against twin Sullivan was a 20-round win. A very close match is my description here. Sullivan's cleverness saved him many times throughout the fight, and he undoubtedly outpointed Flynn. The referee's decision was influenced by Sullivan's unfair fighting. In several rounds, time and again, Sullivan was seen to stick with the elbow and headbutt with his head. The crowd believed it was intentional. So those are the tactics that Flynn is going to employ to the future fighters that he's learned from twin Sullivan. The crowd arose to call its protest many times and called for the referee to award the fight to Flynn on foul. But he did not. Neither man was knocked down, but they took a world of punishment. The results of the match, 20-round win for Jim Flynn. When the gong sounded at the end of the 20 rounds, both men were covered in gore, which flowed from the nose and mouth. Both slipped 2 or 3 times each from rushes by the other men. Nearly every round, from the first to the last, might have been called even break. A very close, vicious battle. Sullivan was the better boxer, and Flynn was bleeding before the end of the round 3. But he pressed on amazingly and secured a win out of complete stamina and vitality. 20-round win for Jim Flynn. This next competitive rounds match is pretty shortly thereafter. February 1907, Twin Sullivan 3. Again, very close match. The results, 20-round draw. These are the notes from Twin Sully 3. Flynn was very strong and on the aggressive throughout. Time and again, his rushes carried Sullivan to the ropes, and once or twice he seemed to have the Boston man going. Sullivan uppercut constantly at close range. Close quarters were particularly effective. The Pueblo man had the better of the early rounds, and it looked for a time that he would win. Sullivan showed strong after the 13th and had the best of all the latter rounds. Jack Twin Sullivan was dissatisfied with the decision. Before the fight, Twin Sullivan was a 10-7 favorite. Neither sustained much damage. Both were strong at finish. Sullivan was floored in the second round. The results of the match, Twin Sullivan, number 3, 20-round draw. You got 1 point for that, and my notes are even. So again, in the same year here, we have April 1907, Jim Flynn's level up against George Gardner. Gardner was a future champion. The results of the match, 18-round win, KO for Jim Flynn. There was little chance for Gardner after the 12th. His blows had little steam on the sturdy Pueblo fireman, who rushed his opponent at will and generally worn him down. It was a stomach blow that sank Gardner. Gardner put up a great fight and had Flynn worried many times throughout the match. But Flynn secured the victory by simply wearing Gardner down, and Gardner was unable to have a strong enough punch to be able to keep Jim Flynn off of him. Results of the match, 18-round win, KO. 3 points for Flynn. Next competitive round match was in the fall, 1907, September, against Tony Ross. Tony Ross was one of the White Hope candidates at heavyweight, or beefed up cruiserweight anyway. Flynn had the better of the fight throughout and proved the cleaner of the two fighters. Ross, however, had lost friends by cowardly striking low. The 15th round, Ross struck low and was warned by the referee. Flynn wasn't hurt much. Ross again hit low, and this time hurt Flynn in the last round, the 18th. Ross became angry with the decision and made a mad rush at Flynn, knocking the latter down after the decision was announced. Before they could be separated, Ross called Flynn a quitter. The fight had been slightly in favor of Flynn, who at the stoppage. So the referee awarded the decision to Jim Flynn on a low blow. So that was a 18th round win from DQ. So next year we have a miss for Jim Flynn. Flynn was matched with Jack Rutt, and that would be a level up for Flynn. And they should have certainly fought this match, because I'm in favor of having more matches. And that match never happened, and that would be very significant for Jim Flynn to be able to get a victory over Jack Rutt. Rutt is far ahead of Flynn. And Rutt was considered the light heavyweight champion all through the latter half of his time period. And that's what Flynn should have been doing, is fighting light heavyweights and middleweights, and not fighting heavyweights, because he didn't have the power to be able to do much damage to a heavyweight. So obviously, Jim Flynn's next match is against a heavyweight. So he got himself the win over Tony Ross, and the referee called Tony Ross the unlucky man. That's why the only thing that prevented him from getting the title shot with Jack Johnson. So actually, this isn't even a title shot. This is a Jack Johnson before the title. Sorry for the confusion. I went through a lot of notes, so I'm having a brain fart. The 11th round loss KO was the results of this match against Jack Johnson, but Tony Ross was probably about ready to fight Jack Johnson, so that loss did cost him an opportunity to fight Johnson here. So these are the notes. The end came in the 10th. Flynn slipped to the mat from a misdirected punch. He was up quickly as he rushed Johnson and hit him in the pit of his stomach. Flynn dropped to the floor again, and he was carried to his corner as the gong sounded. In the 10th round, he sat on his corner and tried to regain some vitality. He came out for the 11th round. The 11th round, Johnson taunted his man and dared him at close quarters to hit him. Then Johnson backed away and shot a quick right at the jaw, and then Flynn sank to the floor, utterly helpless, and was counted out. And he was probably knocked out for a lengthy amount of time. So this was a hard L for Jim Flynn. It wasn't so much that Johnson was so much superior to Flynn. It was more as if Flynn shouldn't be fighting heavyweights, because he really was having a small percentage of success. He does manage to beat Carl Morris, but only because Morris was a 7 fights in. Johnson is far beyond 7 fights in, so he's gonna cakewalk over Jim Flynn. And oddly enough, Johnson chooses to fight him again after this first fight prior to his championship was a complete destruction of Flynn, and somehow he decides he needs to beat up on him again for an easy payday. So right after the Flynn match, right after the Jack Johnson match, that was in November 1907, and so Jim Flynn is immediately going to jump into the stiff competition once again. Is February 1908. He gets his chance to prove all of his wares once for one final time against Twin Sullivan. This is Twin Sullivan number 4. The results of the match: 10-round draw. So he got 3 points for this because I considered this match a win for Jim Flynn. Newspaper decision, 10-round draw. From the very first second, Flynn charged his opponent and the Bostonian like a wild bull loose in the ring. Sullivan went backwards often, usually stopping only when his weather-beaten body was hearing halfway across the ropes with Flynn on top of him, flailing away with both hands. Sullivan tried to speak after the bout, but was booed by the crowd, and they would not have none of it. This is one of my favorite lines from the newspaper article. The fight bugs, they often refer to this, the fight bugs love an aggressive fighter and have long since tired of Sullivan's safe, sane, and conservative style of milling. So the results of the match was a win for Jim Flynn in 10 rounds, even though it was has it as a draw. This was certainly one of the Twin Sullivan's probably worst performances against Flynn. Is Flynn at this point knew how to fight Twin Sullivan, and it was like Twin Sullivan facing himself, as he was fighting exactly how Twin Sullivan fought, and he just gave him a dose of his own medicine, and Twin Sullivan just tried to back off and get away from him, and ended up not mounting much of an attack because Flynn was just constantly rushing from the very onset. From the first round, he was charging the Bostonian like a wild bull. That was exactly how Jim Flynn fought. He was the wild bull in the ring. Okay, his next competitive rounds match. So that was in 1908, and this is in the summer of 1908. Jim Flynn, age 28, is taking on Jim Barry, and this is Jim Barry number 1. The third, he rushed Flynn off of his feet, and the two went down to the floor in a heap. Flynn took the count after they got up, before regaining his feet, and in the fifth, Flynn took a 9 count when he slipped and fell. Jim Barry outweighed his man by 12 to 15 pounds over his opponent. The battle was fast. Barry had the better until the 7th. The 8th was even, and the 9th and the 10th were all Jim Flynn. As I stated, Jim Flynn would try and sneak the last 2 rounds and get themselves draws. And this is a perfect example right here. He improved as a fighter, went on in the 10th round, and he landed harder and more often than any other round. So the results of the match was 10-round draw. So he got 1 point for that. Jim Barry's a pretty difficult match for him. Jim Barry's a trial horse, just like Jim Flynn, but more of a heavyweight version of a trial horse. And Jim Barry could hold up against enormous punishment. So these are like 2 giant, like battle-scarred gladiators going at it. And that's why the match is getting mentioned here. So getting a 10-round draw against Jim Barry on their first encounter was pretty significant for Jim Flynn, because Jim Barry outweighed him by 15 pounds. So that's pretty amazing. Okay, so the notes here. Let me try and figure this out here. So on July, that was Jim Barry. Immediately after this, July 8th, 1908. At this point, Jim Flynn is matched with Stanley Ketchel. And the notes are, but only if Flynn makes weight, as Ketchel would not agree to catch weights. So I think basically in the paper there, because these are right next to each other, this is July 8th, 1908, and the fight happened. Jim Barry was, I think, actually right around that time frame, and I think based on Flynn not being able to knock out Barry, Ketchel moved on to a different opponent, and he took on the Italian fighter Hugo Kelly. So that was right in 1908 is the point when Jim Flynn is one of his greatest misses, and Flynn versus Ketchel would have been a fantastic match, because Flynn could have at least really taught Ketchel some ring tricks that he would have most certainly probably applied in Ketchel's future fights, as Jim Flynn was extremely experienced at this point, and he was still 28 years old, so he wasn't really like far out of his prime. Okay, so Jim Flynn's next competitive rounds match, as you can see here, Flynn is constantly trying to fight at the heavyweight, which he was not a heavyweight. So August 1908, the next month here, is against L. Kaufman, and Kaufman is 10-7 favorite before the fight. This was pretty significant, as Flynn was having a lot of success here. I just drawed with Jim Barry. Jim Barry's a really tough heavyweight, and now Flynn wants to take on one of the premier white hope in 1908 would be L. Kaufman. L. Kaufman was absolutely the premier white hope of 1908, and of all the things, Langford avoided Kaufman, and Flynn, his other contemporary, decides he is going to fight against Kaufman, as he clearly wants another title shot with Jack Johnson. And Jim Flynn wages what has to be almost his career earnings. Flynn wages $1,500 on himself at 10-7 odds to win. And the results of the match, Flynn was beaten to a pulp, carved up insensibly. to his corner. The 8th round, Flynn was down twice. Both eyes were bleeding. Flynn's left eye was completely closed, and his face was battered. Flynn sped in, rushing Kaufman to the ropes, and the bewildered native son was bewildered temporarily, but Kaufman soon continued strong and learned how to keep Flynn off of him. The results of the match: 9-round loss, KO. The referee threw in the towel there. As Kaufman just completely decimated Flynn. Like I said, here's Flynn getting completely decimated by Al Kaufman, and he's should undubiously prove he's going to be no match for Jack Johnson, yet somehow Jack Johnson will fight him again. So then November of 1908, it was Jim Barry 2. Barry punished Flynn's body badly. Flynn was at a disadvantage every single round against Jim Barry. Flynn again rallied in the last round, but he had absorbed far too much punishment. As Flynn is proving that he has got no business here fighting heavyweights. Okay, so we're still in the year 1908 as Flynn has made a very good use out of his prime here. He's still 28 years old, and this is Jim Flynn's level up, December 1908, Sam Langford. Sam Langford, first round KO win over Jim Flynn. The notes: Langford staggered Flynn with an uppercut after Flynn rushed him. Langford floored him continually with his left, and Flynn dropped like a log. It was the same time before, was sometime before Flynn regained his consciousness, as Langford just completely hit him with an uppercut and knocked Flynn out cold in the ring, as he stood there for a great amount of time, like 10-15 minutes before he even regained consciousness. So this is a perfect example where many points in fights where Jim Flynn just appears dead, deceased. It's amazing the guy didn't have just the biggest brain damage of all time. He multiple fights is getting rendered unconscious, and Langford just absolutely showed him he's moving backwards in his career. So Jim Flynn's next competitive rounds fought here, age 29, March 1909, the following year. Billy Papke, number 1. And this is what Flynn should have been doing, is fighting middleweights, because he's can maybe bully a middleweight. He's got no chance to bully a heavyweight, So these are the notes from Billy Papke. 1, Flynn got Papke's nose bleeding instantly. in the first 3 rounds were all Flynn's by a wide margin. Then Papke started to improve and was weak the last round. Papke could hardly stand when the last round ended. Both fighters wanted a draw. The results of the match: 10-round win over Billy Papke. So Billy Papke wanted a draw, and Jim Flynn got the win. So Flynn rebounds a little bit in his career. July 1909. The last one was in March. This is in July. Billy Papke 2. Results of the match: 10-round loss. As Papke improved remarkably from his first fight. Flynn again went after Papke and rushed him. Within 1 round, he was bleeding. Jim Flynn. Flynn landed very few effective blows. He had no defense for Papke's left hands and right uppercuts. Both of Flynn's eyes were swollen shut. He was bleeding from his left eye. Flynn's face resembled the beating from his mouth and eye that were bleeding tremendously. 10-round loss to Billy Papke, as Billy Papke improved considerably. Next competitive rounds match, December 1909. So July was Papke, December, Philadelphia, Jack O'Brien. Flynn had O'Brien in distress in the last round, opening a cut and sending O'Brien to the corner unsteady. Flynn rushed O'Brien throughout the match. The results of the match were: 6-round loss. 0 points are awarded for that. It was a pretty short fight, and O'Brien had first 5 rounds, and Flynn again did his typical method and was strong the last round. So that was December 1909. February 1910. Sam Langford, number 2. Results of the match: 10-round win. Okay, we're going to go through the notes here. Flynn fought like a demon and had Langford backed up, pressed against the ropes. Flynn fought very low in this match, repeatedly rushed into clinches, and fought infighting. In the second round, Langford was wrestled to the floor. He was up instantly. Flynn had the better of the exchanges. The third round, Flynn opened a gash over Langford's right eye that continued to bother Langford throughout the match as blood was getting in his eye. The fourth, the fifth, and the sixth rounds were all Flynn's, as Langford was having trouble seeing out of his eye. The ninth round, Flynn targeted Langford's sore eye. The 10th ended. Langford missed shots throughout. It was a bloody mess at the end of the fight. Langford was a bloody mess at the end of the fight. The results, 10-round win on a level up by Jim Flynn in one of the most amazing achievements of his career. So March 1910 was Sam Langford number 3, and at this point it was the following month, and Langford wants some serious revenge for this. Eight-round loss on KO, the results of the match. Flynn was cut in the mouth in round 1. The second round featured lots of hugging. Flynn was punished and down for the 7 count in round 3. In the 8th round, a series of clinches. Langford came out bleeding from his right eye and mouth. Flynn seemed to be getting stronger as the match wore on. In the 7th round, Flynn didn't allow Langford to get set. Flynn failed for his own weight and knocked himself out. He was unconscious for 5 minutes, bleeding profusely from the nose and mouth. So what happened there was that in the 8th round, Langford actually didn't even knock out Jim Flynn. Jim Flynn knocked himself out. Flynn fell from his own weight and had knocked himself out. He was rendered unconscious for 5 minutes, bleeding in a pool of blood. So he was staggered, bleeding, swung for Sam Langford, and Langford avoided the match, the punch, and Flynn just fell in complete exhaustion. So 8th round loss, KO, even though Langford never even knocked him out. Okay, May 1911. Al Kaufman, number 2. Kaufman suffered the worst punishment of his career. 8 times Flynn floored him. Kaufman was a bloody, pitiful sight. Flynn rushed Kaufman at close quarters. Flynn would hammer him until his guard dropped, and then hammer Kaufman with left and rights on the jaw. Results of the match. KO win. It looks like in 10 for Jim Flynn. So that was Al Kaufman, number 2. Kaufman had the Al Kaufman had the Mike Tyson effect in that after he kind of lost his confidence, he was just never the same, and he's obviously a much different fighter than the second time around than the first time around when he was a brimming giant with confidence. So Jim Flynn proved he's still got a little bit left in the tank there. So he is age 31. September 1911 was his next competitive rounds match, and that was against the Colorado Giant, Carl Morris. Carl Morris, number 1. Sorry, the Oklahoma Giant is what he is. The Oklahoma Giant lost no credit, for he fought through 10 rounds with utter courage that will never be forgotten to those who looked on. The first round, both eyes were partially closed by Carl Morris. The second, by the end of the second, he could barely see, and Flynn was pounding him fearfully, unable to stand off and box. Morris steadily pushed in against the battering and struck blow for blow at close quarters. Carl Morris, he seemed to be immune to punishment. Every time he landed on Flynn, his head bobbed back like it was a hinge in his neck. But for all the willingness and aggression and courage and strength of Carl Morris, he was but a novice at the game. Long experience was Jim Flynn's, and he made the most of it. He used every trick of the ring. For the first 2 rounds, Flynn had wrestled to the floor and was up and unhurt. With the third round ended, Morris unsteadily walked back to his corner. "Please don't stop the fight," he begged the referee, Charlie White. His corner cut his eye so that he could see again. From the 4th to the 10th, Morris would get in occasional blows. Flynn's left eye became closed eventually. The two battled in give and take action. The last round, Morris was completely exhausted and held his arms on Jim Flynn's shoulders as Flynn pounded away at his midsection, and Carl just grimaced in pain. Carl Morris made it to the end of the match. The results of the match was a 10-round win over Carl Morris. And Flynn, despite all of his terrific beatings and punishment that he gave to Carl Morris refused to go down, and he never fell. And Flynn was unable to knock him down. His corner was yelling repeatedly at Flynn to knock out Carl Morris. He couldn't see, and Flynn just could not do it, as Morris absorbed all the punishment and stood at the end of the round a bloody, gory mess, but he never went down. So that win over Carl Morris earned Jim Flynn a title shot. And on July 12th, 1912, we have Jim Flynn versus the heavyweight champion Jack Johnson. And these are the notes of the match. Okay, Jim Flynn's heavyweight championship match. The notes: first round, Johnson opens a huge gash under Flynn's left eye. Johnson refused to shake hands with Flynn before the match. The second round, Flynn's mouth bleeds. As he took a seat, Johnson grabs Flynn by the shoulders and holds him at bay throughout the round. The third round, after a mix-up in the center of the ring, Johnson bled from his mouth. Flynn was also bleeding from the mouth. Flynn neglected a cheer as he rushed the black to the ropes and planted a solid left to the jaw. The round ended and Flynn's face was covered in blood. He is the bleeder. The fourth round, Johnson constantly held Flynn in close quarters as frustrations grew. Flynn protested to the referee, "I can't fight while he's holding me," Flynn shouted to the ref. The fifth round, Flynn battered with his head 3 times and complained Johnson made it justified by constantly holding him as Flynn attempts to headbutt Johnson. Johnson, maddened, landed a volley of straight lefts and right punches to the face, fairly bewildering Flynn, though he stopped himself apparently with a view to prolong the contest. Flynn's seconds warned Jim Flynn to stop headbutting Jack Johnson in between rounds. The sixth round, Flynn bled profusely from the nose as Johnson beat him with a left and right combination. Flynn failed to land a glove on the champion. Johnson made the blood spout as he rained blow after blow on his bewildered opponent. The seventh round, Flynn again headbutts and was warned twice. Flynn was warned for the 10th time in the round. "One more and I'll disqualify you," the referee states. The 8th round was lots of hugging, and in the 9th round, Flynn tried to headbutt again Johnson and was disqualified. Flynn said after the contest that none of his actions would have happened if Johnson had fought fairly and stopped holding him at close quarters. So this is a thing a lot in fights where they try and agree with if they want to infight or not, and most fighters, Flynn would balk at trying to agree to break cleanly, and Johnson would just hold him at close quarters so that he was able to just not get close quarter shots on him, and Johnson would actually hold his wrist, his arms, his shoulders, and do all types of tactics that were the referee should be breaking them up, but he's doing a very poor job of it and just not big enough or just not capable enough. And Flynn's getting frustrated, and he's trying to headbutt Johnson because he feels like he's taking advantage of the rules. And this is where Corbett writes in the paper the following week there that Johnson is just a miserable sight and losing his prime, and he's just resorted to holding and fighting at a complete disadvantage of the fighter by holding him, and he's ripping on him for being able to not finish Flynn off, which he was doing on purpose to try and prolong the contest so that the fans would get their money's worth. But the fight was interrupted by the police, so it made Flynn not even look like he was capable of knocking out Jim Flynn. And the entire match was just an completely ugly affair of holding and no regard for the rules of the ring by either party. It would be how the paper described it. It was an ugly affair, and I guess Flynn earned his title shot by beating Carl Morris, but really, I mean, the results of this were just completely predictable, and they there's a newspaper article that says it would be the upset of the century if Flynn would win because he was so completely enabled to be able to fight heavyweights, and then he's fighting the best heavyweight, and it's just kind of a complete embarrassment for Johnson to be fighting somebody of such a not capable caliber. So he is ripped on in the press for it. Okay, so Flynn's next competitive rounds match here is going to be a very exciting one here. We have the age 32 Jim Flynn. This happens in looks like December 1912 against Luther Mccarthy. So this is pretty further into the next year. And the results of the match was a 16-round loss, TKO, by Jim Flynn to Luther Mccarthy, the premier White Hope fighter. And these are the notes from the match. Flynn was outclassed, outweighed, and outfought. He had received the most terrific beating that any fighter in recent months received. McCarthy fought with the coolness of a veteran. In the 9th round, McCarthy stopped Flynn's blows and rushes with jabs and body blows. Luther landed a hard right and FIreman to the boards for a count of 9. Flynn rose groggy and hanged on and was sent down again with a shower of blows. Jim Flynn, once again, he rose wobbly. Sent down again for the 3rd time by Luther Mccarthy. And once again, Jim Flynn rose and made a remarkable rally as the round ended. As he went to his corner in the 9th round, cries to stop the fight could be heard. From the 10th round on, Flynn slowed considerably. Flynn's face was beaten to a pulp, and his body showed evidence of terrific punches of his heavier opponent. In the 16th last round, Flynn was down twice and appeared helpless. Flynn took an awful beating and never had a chance. Flynn's remarkable vitality persisting after 12 years of ring battles went away in the middle of the 16th round. Results of the match: 16th round loss, TKO to Luther Mccarthy. So they're immediately matched again. Age 32, Jim Flynn versus 20-year-old Luther Mccarthy. Number 2, April 1913. Flynn looked short and fat compared with his gigantic, well-built opponent. He demonstrated early he was only there to stay 6 rounds. He depended entirely on infighting and at close quarters to Luther McCarthy as possible, frequently clinching after exchanges. McCarthy displayed a surprising defensive skill and proved himself a far better boxer. The man of his bulk and physique, usually power before the end of the second round. Flynn was covered in blood at this point. His stomach was red from the tattoo punches of Luther McCarthy, with which McCarthy had punished him virtually every single round. McCarthy forced matters in the sixth round and had Flynn hanging on to save himself from being counted out. Results of the match, sixth round, hard loss for Jim Flynn, as McCarthy is improving rapidly and well on his way to a title shot. His next competitive rounds match, age 32 versus age 22. Again, another white hope, Jim Coffey. So basically, Jim Flynn is a cannon fodder for all the future white hopes coming down the pike. The battle-scarred warrior of Pueblo ripped and tore and slashed his way to victory. Wailing away at his opponent until he reduced him to 6 feet of staggered, knocked out, kneed humility. Not since Ketchel and O Brien has so much real fighting been crammed into 10 rounds, and it was Flynn's experience, aggressiveness, and cast iron jaw that won it for him. Results of the match with Jim Coffey, 10-round draw. Number 1. You got 1 point for that. So Jim Coffey is certainly a talented white hope middleweight, and here are some notes from it. The first round, Coffey popped left and rights, and the Dublin import made the most of his opportunities. He brought blood in streams from Flynn's face immediately into round 1. The second and the third, Coffey continued to score. Flynn's gradual appearance of an overripe tomato is what he started to look like. The fourth round, the Pueblo FIreman took matters into his own hands and began to lead with haymakers. And when the bell rang, Coffey was reeling from a succession of blows on the body and the jaw. Fifth and sixth rounds, matters were fairly even. From the seventh on, the tough old veteran forced the fight. Jim Flynn may be on the toboggan, but he's still good enough to put an enduring crimp in the aspirations of many members of the White Hopes. So he gave Jim Coffey like one of the great tests of his career. These are exactly what the new and up-and-coming White Hope fighters needed, and that's what a 10-round draw. So, again, his next match is against another White Hope fighter, Gunboat Smith. Jim Flynn, age 33. Gunboat, age 26. August 1913. Results, 5-round loss, TKO. Smith had the better man steadily and pitifully one of the gamest fighters who ever donned the mitts. He took a terrific battering. Before Flynn was beaten into submission, he had possessed a jaw and head of steel. He must have had to succumb to the punishment pounding from a man that is credited with being one of the worst punishers in the game. 3 times Flynn was down in the last round. When he arose, his face was bathed in gore, and he resembled Mephisto. Flynn was down again from a right. He rested on his knees as the referee stopped the match. So Flynn went down in that match, looks like about 3 or 4 times, as a gunboat just tore him up and just slashed the bonkers out of Flynn, as a 33-year-old Flynn is on the toboggan ride into the valley of has-beens, is what the line that Jim Corbett would use. So we got just a couple left here, as we're going to call the end Jim Flynn pretty soon here. Age 33, Jim Flynn versus age 22, battling Levinsky, number 1, December 1913. Flynn was outclassed and fortunate to go the limit. Levinsky was far too clever, but was equally adept in defensive tactics. Flynn rarely got a chance to lead a punch. When he landed, he failed to do much damage. After the third, Levinsky was fighting like a champion. Levinsky was a tactical. Flynn was absolutely no defense whatsoever, and would very little steam on his punches. Levinsky might have duplicated the performance of Gunboat if he had a little more steam on his punches. Results of the match: 10-round loss, hard loss, as Levinsky just puts on a masterclass to Flynn. So here you have Flynn taking on the light heavyweights, which are showing far more tremendous skill than the cowboy version of White Hope heavyweights that have hardly any skill. You know, these light heavyweights are real fighters, and Levinsky just completely outclasses Jim Flynn, as he learns here. Okay. So we have 2 more matches here. May 1914, the following year, against Jack Dillon. This is again a level up. Was a fast bout. Flynn's aggressiveness earned him a draw. Results of the match: 10-round draw. This is Jim Flynn's last credit that he receives here, as we only got 1 more match after this. This is his last credit of his career in May 1914 against Jack Dillon. These are the notes. The second round, 3 times Flynn hits the canvas. Flynn got up and clinched out the remaining minutes. The third round, Dillon slowed down. The fourth round, Dillon drives Flynn around the ring. The fifth round was tame. The sixth round was Flynn's best. Flynn fought desperately, and what landed did little damage. The blows found a resting place on Dillon's jaw. The 7th, 8th, and 9th were fairly even. Dillon probably landing the cleaner blows. Flynn bores in, banging away merrily with Dillon, countering with savage left hooks and an occasional uppercut. So the results of the match, 10-round draw. And this would be a match that Dillon had the victory, and my notes, he won the newspaper decision, but we're giving Flynn a 1 point because it was declared a draw. So we have the end of the notes here. The 10th round, this was the same as the first round. I found both slamming away with both hands. Flynn, who to the writer, who has witnessed him many times during his long career, he looks like the same old Flynn. At any rate, he was not changed his style of fighting and is just as willing to take chances as he ever was. So he's definitely fading, but not quite fully over the hill. So this is his last competitive rounds match that we're going to go through. June 1914. I wanted to get up to this match here, and this is his rematch with Carl Morris. Carl Morris, number 2. And this is Carl Morris's sweet chance to get some revenge on fireman Jim Flynn, who dealt him one of the worst ring beatings of his entire pugilism history. And these are the notes from the match. Morris made a chopping block out of his man, who 2 years ago gave him the worst drubbing of his career. The 6th round, 3 times Flynn was sent to the canvas. In the round succession, he was saved from knockout by the bell. The 9th round, he had Flynn hanging on the ropes, but was unable to put over the magic punch. Flynn's aggressiveness set the crowd wild, and he was accosted a great ovation as he went to his corner. Morris surprised the vast crowd by his clever footwork. He was much faster than Flynn. There was more steam behind his punches, and he hit with more precision. Carl Morris. DQ win in the 9th as Flynn hit Morris low, and he fell to the floor and was helped to his corner. In the 3rd round, Jim Flynn had Morris down with a low blow. In the 9th round, he dropped him for the 2nd time with a low blow and was disqualified. But it was Carl Morris's chance for revenge as he completely made a chopping block out of Jim Flynn, beat him senseless, and knocked him down throughout the match, and absolutely got his revenge on the fireman Jim Flynn, as Carl Morris gave him a taste of his own medicine. And that was the end of Jim Flynn's career here, as the end of his competitive rounds. He fought far on through the 1925, and he had his fake victory over Jack Dempsey, and he was in no shape to win anything significant from this point on, as he was nothing more than a chopping block for these new fighters that were coming up. But he was more than willing to just take whatever punishment they could give out. It's amazing that Jim Flynn did not die of severe brain damage. He died pretty late into his career, and he lasted for quite a while there. And I got a picture of him as he laid in the hospital there. I think age, in his 70s, and he says, I can still defeat death. I know it. He said that the morning before he died, and even at the very last day of his life, he was looking for a fight. So Jim Flynn, he had to be one of the all-time great schoolyard bullies, because he probably picked fights from the moment he was a kid. I would imagine Jim Flynn was quite the schoolyard bully, and he was always looking for a fight, and that's one of the reasons why he had 1,000 rounds boxed, because he getting his ass kicked didn't faze him whatsoever. He just kept coming at the guy with relentless aggression. So that is a career boxing profile for the Pueblo fireman Jim Flynn. Thanks for listening.